Welcome to Seminole Sidelines. Happy Tuesday. What a long, strange trip this has been. But we are here to settlement day between Florida State and the ACC. We've got a full house here, Osceola Seminole Sidelines. Our legal analyst, Will Fixel, joins us, publisher Jerry Cutts, senior writer Kurt Weiler. I'm editor Bob Ferranti. Guys, this all started December of 2023. We thought this was going to be a long haul. We didn't think it was going to end fast. I think we were kind of right there. Legally, we knew this might drag out through the various volleys, through the various courts, Florida, South Carolina, North Carolina. It's come down to this, a settlement that honestly might take 30 days to put pen to paper, to legally, formally wrap this up. But for all intents and purposes, Florida State's Board of Trustees, Clemson's Board of Trustees, the ACC presidents and chancellors have agreed to a framework of a settlement. We'll kind of get into the details and what we know, what we've been able to report, what some of the national outlets have been able to report. But I think we do want to start with the legal end of this. And Will, this is a good opportunity for you to address the challenges of the settlement, but why we're here now, what transpired maybe in February and March to get to this point.
Yeah, in any litigation, Bob, and thank you for the introduction, for there to be a settlement, the parties, both parties, or if there are multiple parties, how many of our parties are in the litigation, have to be able to understand that there are risks with moving forward with that litigation and have to see that there are strengths of their case, but also potential weaknesses. And I think in this litigation, there were weaknesses and strengths for all the parties, and I think that recognition, and particularly the complexity of the litigation, given that it is in multiple venues, multiple jurisdictions, probably had everyone nervous enough to think, is there a middle path? And that's where you do reach settlements in litigation, is when parties see the costs of moving forward, in hard costs and litigation costs, and then also see that if they take it to the end, that they may lose. And so instead of risking that result, what can we get out of this that allows us to move forward in a better place than we were before the litigation began? And I think for both the ACC and Florida State and Clemson, arguably that's been accomplished, and that's how settlements are reached in litigation. And that's what it appears happened here, is that there was enough risk for each of the parties to sit back and say, okay, is there something we can get with the leverage that we have that makes us in a better position than where we were? And I think for Florida State in particular, and the subscribers to the Osceola, I'm heartened as a Florida State fan to see that it appears as if Florida State will be receiving more money, potentially. If there is a new landing spot for Florida State in the future, somewhat distant future, 5 to 10 years from now, that it'll be at a less cost to Florida State to get to that location in the future, and that they should be financially viable until that date is reached, and then at that point they can reassess whether the ACC is the place to be or not.
And Jerry, I think we've talked about, you and I on the phone, there's a risk management discussion for every president, chancellor, AD around the country. They all have to cover their own butts, so to speak, but make sure they're making a decision that is in a common sense for themselves, for their athletes, for their students, for their universities. Your thoughts legally on what Florida State did and how it got to this decision to settle.
Let's go back to the decision to bring the lawsuit in the first place. That was a risk assessment. If we don't file a lawsuit, we're doomed. We won't be able to compete because the difference between us and Florida is $30 million a year, and growing maybe. And so I think that risk analysis back then was realized, and I talked about it yesterday, the alignment between the athletic director, the president, and the board of trustees was unique, that they were all on the same page. And that, as I've said many times, good decisions usually come when you have alignment in your administration And that hasn't always been the case at Florida State. But at this particular, in our best moments, it was. And it appears to me that they were all on the same page and made a heroic. I mean, that was not an easy decision to sue the conference and to take the heat that they took from, the public. That took courage. And then I think the alignment also gave them staying power through the lawsuit. We heard today from Dr. McCullough, Peter Collins, Carolyn Egan, the FSU legal counsel, and from Michael Alford, that during that 14 months, they had some discussions that weren't happy ones. That if they didn't have good alignment, the thing could have fallen apart. So, I want to first of all give credit to the alignment of that administration. And then secondly, Will, I think I want to give credit to the legal team to, as was quoted, Bob, you've got the quotes, but Dr. McCullough made the statement that they had to test the strength of what was perceived to be an ironclad agreement. And so the legal team had to have done some of the right things and deserve credit for what they've done. And really probably advising Florida State of what its risks are along the way. And then finally, I want to give credit to, this isn't like me suing my next door neighbor over a hedge. This was a lawsuit that involved 18 member schools, an Atlantic Coast Conference, and a television partner had to be in alignment. So I don't know what all Jim Phillips did, but he certainly had a very difficult time, I'm sure, getting all of those 16 schools other than Florida State and Clemson to agree to a settlement. I don't know if that happens with John Swofford.
Well, and Jerry, and I don't mean to interrupt or interject.
No, you're not. Perfect time.
Jerry, Jim Phillips had to convince some of its member institutions to take less money than they're receiving today, potentially. That is, that's a tough pill to swallow when you believe you entered a conference and had an agreement that said something to the contrary.
Yeah.
And, I want to, while we're giving credit, I want to give credit to Jerry, Bob, and Kurt and the Osceola team, because to the extent that any FSU fans are disappointed in this result, because there was a belief that FSU was somehow going to easily be able to get out of the ACC through this litigation. You guys never said that, because I don't think it was based in reality. And to Jerry's point, the result that really happened today, where FSU was getting potentially substantially more income to allow them to at least, be on somewhat equal footing with peer institutions in the state and the Southeast, really was a heroic effort by FSU to in the face of a lot of, like Jerry said, vitriol from the media and folks that were telling them that there was an ironclad agreement with the ACC. So I think there's a lot of credit to go around to allow the ACC to continue to be around for another 5 to 10 years, and hopefully it can be a launching pad to see things improve dramatically within the conference. And if it doesn't, FSU may at that point be able to find a landing spot where they can be on equal footing. Totally.
Can I add one more thing that certainly deserves discussion? Is that when Florida State, before filing that lawsuit, they had asked for this and didn't get it. And they asked for the Success Initiative and didn't get it. And only then did they file the lawsuit. So at the end of the day, what have we got? the two primary things that Florida State had asked for. So not only did the ACC listen, but at the end of the day, they responded with something that is very creative among conferences. And I would not be surprised to see other conferences start to entertain it.
Well, and Jerry, I would really say that Florida State got all three things it wanted, because the third thing we haven't really talked about is that they have a firm. This is how much it costs to leave the conference in this year, and you get to keep your media rights. The thing that was up in the air, like Florida State could have bought out previously, but the question that wasn't defined was what happens with the media rights. Until this, the ACC was probably going to try and claim those. Now, whenever that buyout comes and it scales down to $75 million in I think 2030, 2031, and for that year, I mean, that's you get your media rights, and that because the whole thing is you're not valuable to the Big Ten or the SEC if you don't have your media rights. So they really got all three things they wanted.
Kurt, to your point, that may be the biggest thing of all.
No question, and arguably, if the reports, and I don't know that they've been verified yet about the increased payments that FSU may get up till that time, you will have in effect been paid for your buyout over the next 5 years, if that's the route FSU chooses to go. So there's an argument. I don't know that it's lock solid that if those numbers are correct, you stay in the conference for 5 more years, but then eventually there's really no penalty for exit in the 5 years from now, if you take into consideration the additional money they'll receive over the next 5 years.
Yeah, FSU's presentation didn't go into the numbers, but I think we can say it's confirmed because Clemson's presentation I saw screenshots of, and theirs said it could be up to $120 million over the 6 years. So that sounds like it's 20 a year, and that over 5 years. If that was the timeline, you're right. I mean, if they just banked that and didn't put that into other things, that could be your money right there.
Right, and let me just say this to clarify a point I made earlier about why I think it was unrealistic to assume that a settlement would occur with FSU or in Clemson or some group of schools leaving the ACC. That would be such a dramatic change to the ACC that it's hard to believe that a settlement would occur with the ACC agreeing for that to happen, unless it was so financially punitive to FSU that in effect, the litigation didn't do a whole lot because they could always leave and just pay this enormous penalty. I mean, in any litigation, in any negotiation, I mean, don't even worry about it, litigation, right? But in any negotiation, if the resolution for one party is in effect, I wouldn't say it's as draconian to say a death warrant, but something that would very significantly change the constitution of the entity that's having to settle, they're going to fight against that tooth and nail, and that's what causes the litigation, right? The only path forward to a settlement at the end of the day was some kind of arrangement like this. And if what Kurt has verified is true about what the numbers are, it does seem to me to be a very equitable deal for Florida State. And really what they're doing in return is staying in the conference for 5 years, it appears. And then at that point, they'll have a decision to make about what options there are and what they want to do and what the status of college athletics and the ACC is at that time. Personally, I think that's a very good deal for FSU, and it gives the ACC, and probably the reason the ACC agreed to this is it gives the ACC certainty, and it gives the ACC a soft landing pad to become whatever it's going to become in 5 years as well. Whether that's some kind of Ivy League light with what's left if schools leave, or whether they're able to get themselves back on their feet fully. And college athletics has changed to a point where they're able to financially be somewhat equivalent to the Big Two right now, the Big Ten and the SEC. It gives the ACC some time to reorganize and figure out what it's going to do. So to me, that's where this settlement would make sense for both parties. That's where you get a settlement.
The other two things is in the next 5 years, we're going to see a lot of changes in college football. It's very murky what the next 5 years are. And within the next 5 years, both the Big Ten and the SEC media contracts will be renegotiated. And so I think the timing of the 5 years is good for a lot of reasons.
I agree. I think want to dive into kind of what that 2025 through 2030 looks like in a minute, but going back to some of these legal elements, I think this is maybe speculative on my part to even ask, and it's tough for Will to answer. But I think a lot of people are going to be asking what maybe sparked. Was it the Florida Supreme Court saying we're not going to hear this case? Was it all about what state was going to what state would this case push forward in? Would we have a Florida case and a North Carolina case going deep into 2025? I have so many legal questions that we'll never know the answers to because we have a settlement, right? But do you think anything legally came about in the last, say, weeks or month that said, okay, guys, let's all get in a room virtually and come up with a settlement?
Yeah, I would say two things. One, Florida State and Clemson were able to create enough smoke about the contract that it may not say what the ACC thought it said, or that it may not be enforceable for another reason, that it's against public policy, it's overly punitive damages clause, to make the ACC think, well, perhaps there is some legal basis that scares us, right? So there was some legal question that was put into the ACC's mind that if they continue to litigate, they could lose. There was a chance of loss. And then I think probably, even more important than that was there was a substantial question of who was going to decide what that contract meant. Was it going to be a court in North Carolina, a court in Florida, a court in South Carolina? And I think the ACC was probably concerned about what a Florida court at the end of the day would do. And then I think if you're Florida State, you probably have the reverse, right? Like, what would a North Carolina court do if it ends up being decided in North Carolina? And what would that mean for us if we were to have to litigate for an additional 3 to 5 years or whatever it would take to figure out, what this really means? And then what would that mean as far as have we breached our contract and would we owe damages and everything like that? So I think there was substantial risk on both sides that was created, as Jerry said, by good lawyering to enable Phillips to go to to go to the ACC member institutions and say, if we keep going forward, we could lose. And then at the same time, Florida State, as Jerry said, or Bob, maybe it was you, there were some tough days in this litigation, right? So there were some conversations in that room of, well, gosh, what happens if we strike out on this? Or, because this is very unique litigation, what happens if there are multiple judgments out there that say different things? And then how is that resolved? And, when you're in any litigation and there are those kinds of risks there, that's when you get settlement. And that's why I always advise clients, when you go into a mediation, for instance, which is we've talked about this in the past, but it's a formal negotiation with a third party, really to facilitate settlement, that mediator's got to be tough as heck in your room, fighting against what you're saying so that you can understand what those risks are. And that's kind of the mediator you want if you're interested in settlement, because that mediator is going to do the same thing in the other room so that both sides understand the risks and benefits of moving forward. And that's where you can achieve settlement. So, you're right, Bob, in some sense. Can we all look into a crystal ball and say this is the exact point where they said settlement is it's time? I don't think we can do that, but I think we saw enough of the litigation to understand, particularly on the jurisdictional side, that both sides felt like there was a risk of loss.
I'm with you. I think people are now going to question, okay, what does the landscape look like for Florida State, let's say from now through June of 2030? And I think it's tough as an athletic director. You probably can't just budget in $20 million extra dollars, because that would be foolish to presume you're going to get that kind of money. But Jerry, you're going to get significantly more money moving forward, which means every time a coach comes into your office and says, our athletes need X, and then the next coach comes in and says, our athletes need Y.
They're always going to do that.
They're always coming, but now you can say, hey, guess what? We have more money.
Yeah.
How does this just make it not easier to compete, but easier for an AD to say, we can help you with this and that?
Yeah. Well, I think it gives Alford the strength to be a better athletic director. Instead of constantly cutting corners, you can have a 5-year plan that is for excellence instead of just to get by. Some of the worst decisions you make in your life is when you don't have the money to make a better decision, And so, yeah, I think that'll help Michael a lot. But the other thing I'll tell you it does is, I think somebody brought it up, not me, but that I think maybe is that you can get, this is a message to your student athletes that Florida State fought for you, put it all on the line for you. You got publicly flogged for doing it, but they did it for you. And as I said on the call yesterday, I think Seminole boosters can say that to every one of their donors, that, we definitely need your contribution because, listen, the gap is closed a little bit here, right? We've bridged part of the media gap, but we still have a very large gap in season ticket sales, in booster annual fund donations. That doesn't stop. This doesn't address that. But I think as a fundraiser, I would be much more comfortable going to my donor now and saying, hey, we fought a good battle and got the bridge partway built. We need you to finish it, And so I think that helps Alford immensely. And he's got these big projects going right now that are very bold.
I agree. I mean, Will, you're a season ticket holder in multiple sports. You go to the games. You've been invested in Florida State's teams. We know the investment. I think this was talked about a lot in the Board of Trustees meeting today too. How much you invest in athletics often then yields the dividends on the field through that team's success. Just knowing these coaches, knowing these teams and programs, how do you see Florida State benefiting? Again, let's look at it as a 5-year window through June of 2030 or so. How can this benefit Florida State athletics, do you think?
Well, it just dawned on me during this conversation, something that may become a fairly powerful incentive for Florida State, but also for all conference members. Something that's bothered me about the ACC really since Miami and Virginia Tech joined back in 04, 05 is I don't think the conference has at all times been focused on creating matchups that make sense and that people want to see. If you think about the old divisional setup, we were having Boston College and Maryland and these teams coming to Tallahassee that never made any sense, right? And I hope now, if you think about this may be an impact from this, is that every team in the conference should want to schedule the most marquee matchups you can to get eyeballs on you to get the most money. So there's as a season ticket holder, that's one of the things you mentioned. As a fan for Florida State, I want to see Florida State playing teams that are the better teams in the conference, playing Notre Dame more often. I want to see the matchups with Georgia and Alabama stay. I want to see those teams come to Doak Campbell Stadium. Now there's a very powerful incentive for those to happen. There will also be powerful incentives for them to happen at other times where they'll get the most eyeballs on them, right? I mean, I almost wonder whether they'll be politicking to put, Florida State, Miami on a particular weekend when, maybe the SEC doesn't have as strong of a schedule because those schools will want it to be done that way. And maybe that's good for the conference. I mean, I hope that FSU and the other member institutions of the ACC see this as an opportunity to strengthen the games within the conference to the extent that's possible. There was a rumor that maybe Florida State, Clemson, Miami would play Notre Dame more often. I love that idea. I hope they do. I hope we play Georgia Tech more often. Obviously, we play Miami and Clemson. We need to keep the SEC games. We need to keep Florida. It may be an unpopular opinion, but I didn't mind the Friday night Florida game. We were all alone on TV. Those types of things, FSU's going to get more eyeballs when they do those kinds of things. So hopefully it creates creativity within FSU and the other ACC member institutions to really think about how do we create these marquee matchups. And, as I understand it, there's even there's some incentive for eyeballs that are on basketball games. It's no secret I graduated from Duke. I hope they think about that as well. They do a pretty good job of scheduling hard non-conference games, but maybe creative ways to think about the Carolina Duke game too. That creates those incentives for basketball. So I hope every member institution, in particular Florida State, thinks about the new rubric of how they get paid and makes the conference better. And then if the conference is better, if Florida State is better, then hopefully, we know FSU can win in the ACC. We've won 3 national championships, and we got completely, I won't say the term, but, we should have been in the playoffs last year. No question about it, right? We were in the ACC when all that success happened. So let's get back to doing it,
And kind of along those lines, something we haven't talked about. I mean, for the next 5 years, no, Florida State won't probably, even if they're maxing out at 20 million, quite make up the deficit that's going to continue to grow with those SEC Big Ten teams. But it continues to grow the advantage financially they have over the rest of the ACC, especially. I mean, some teams are going to have to take less, so Florida State can take more, those with less viewers. And as long as you're in the ACC, it's an easier path to the playoff. I know there's been some talk about there might be moved to the 14, and it might be a 4-4-2-2-1-1 format where 2 ACC teams are always in. And, it's an easier path to the playoff probably as long as you're in the ACC. And on top of that, the ACC's deal right now is the teams get to keep that money they make for making the playoffs. It's not split among the conference. I think Clemson and SMU both got $4 million for appearing in a first-round game. I think that goes up to $20 million for appearing in the national title game, and the school gets to pocket all of that. Obviously, coming off where Florida State is right now, it's funny to talk about that, but we've seen how things can turn around, and obviously 5 years is a long time in college athletics.
Yeah, the transfer portal allows you to make a jump, sometimes a leap that can really help you on the field and perhaps financially too. Let's sneak in a quick break here, guys, and then we'll come back. I want to talk about the long term, what this means for Florida State. Do you stay in the ACC for the long haul? I know nobody wants to hear about that, but there are the TV ramifications that we all kind of have looked at as far as these TV contracts. Let's do a quick break here from our sponsors, and we'll kind of dive into the long term there.
Hey Seminole fans, Alumni Hall is your ultimate FSU shopping experience and has moved to a new location off Timberlane Road in Tallahassee. Shop FSU gear from Nike, Champion, New Era, Yeti, and more. Alumni Hall has Seminole gear for the entire family, plus accessories and gifts. Spend $150 and you'll earn $10 off your next purchase with their Hall Pass rewards. Stop by their new location on Timberlane Road near REI or shop anytime online at alumnihall.com. Alumni Hall, where Seminole fans shop. Finding an experienced lawyer you can trust is crucial. With over 50 years of combined litigation experience, the attorneys at Mowry Law Firm are dedicated to providing our clients with exceptional legal services, focusing on car and trucking accidents, premises liability, and wrongful death. Call 904-824-7799, MowryLaw.com.
Okay, welcome back. Osceola Seminole Sidelines, Tuesday afternoon. Quick reset. We've got Will Fixel, our legal analyst, publisher Jerry Cutts, senior writer Kurt Weiler. I'm Bob Ferranti. We've hit on a lot of things so far with this settlement, a historic day. I think we have to address the long-term view. Jerry, we did hit on this a little bit yesterday. A lot of folks are just curious, when can Florida State get out of the ACC? We want out. If you are wanting just that, it's probably now you have a date. June of 2030 is potentially where that window opens up at a far reduced amount. An amount, right? Kurt, we've been talking about this too. You finally know what a number looks like. So that's June of 2030 instead of June of 2036. All these TV contracts are going to be coming up for negotiation around the country. What does ESPN want? What does Fox want? Who values a massive brand like Florida State with all of these eyeballs watching in football and potentially men's basketball and other sports too, right? So long-term view, Jerry, what do you view this? It's a long way off, more than 5 years, but look into that crystal ball a little bit.
Well, let me ask Kurt a question, if I could. Kurt, you covered this story today and probably got into the weeds deeper than I did. It seemed to me that right now, if we won out today, it's 175 million.
65. And I think that's yeah.
And then it decreases 18 million per year between now and that 5-year period.
31.
About 75 million in 2030, right? 75
and
million.
then it plateaus there. Yeah.
Yeah. So for our listeners who want out today, we have a number. If
It's a big check. It's a big check.
If our state wants to get out right now today, it would be 165 million. We don't have to wait 5 years. Next year, it could be 147 million. And so I think let me just say that for those fans that want out right now, you got the get out of jail. It's not free card, but at least we know that we bring our marketing rights with us. And if the Big Ten really wanted us right now, or some other conference, you could have that conversation, I believe. Am I right?
For a year from now, yeah.
Yeah.
For August 2026.
So I don't want to give people false hope, because I don't think the Big Ten or SEC are in a position right now that they want to expand. But when that time comes, they know what it's going to take to get Florida State out of the conference. But no, to your direct question, Bob. I think for the next 5 years, you've got the freedom to dream, and the freedom to have conversations with people and find where is the right place for us. And it could be that the right place for us in 5 years is right in the ACC. But at least now the shackles are off. If you want out bad enough, you can just buy your way out now.
Jerry, you brought up a good point. I think some people, I've seen the frustration. We've all seen some frustration about, I thought we were getting out. I thought that's what this was leading to. And at least for the moment, it isn't. I mean, the thing is, as far as my read on it, I think this is the best case scenario right now, because you could get out and that's fine and dandy. It costs a lot of money. The problem is, I think there's absolutely a world where the Big Ten or the SEC are interested long term. Short term, that them taking on Florida State starting in 2026 would mean that each of those schools, they're not increasing the TV deal. They're not the conference isn't getting more money. Everybody just gets a smaller piece of the pie because they're adding a school. I doubt they'd be willing to do that. The Big Ten deal is up in 29 at the end of the 2030 academic year, 2029, 2030, right when kind of you're hitting that 75 million threshold. And that, to me, I mean, the SEC deal isn't up till 2034, so that's even longer term. But the fact is, I'm not sure Florida State would have a place in one of those two conferences right now, because I'm not sure those schools would be willing to take less when they could easily wait it out and add Florida State when they can negotiate a new deal 5 years from now.
Yeah.
So, I think this is best for Florida State because they're getting more money and they have a place, and they have a place that is pretty clearly valuing them highly. I just don't know if the Big Ten or the SEC right now is interested, because, again, it's just everyone gets a little smaller piece of the pie.
Right.
Who's to even say that these conferences at all will exist in 5 years, though? I mean, isn't there a world where it's totally privatized in 5 years?
Yes.
I mean, if you look at the change between 5 years ago and today, it's just night and day. And
Right.
you project ahead 5 years, there could be 60 schools that just say, we're going to go totally private. And you may have some divisions and conferences within it. But, I think for Florida State, you just want to make sure whenever that happens, you're at the table. And maybe there'll still be a conference, to it. I mean, it's hard to think those brands, at least those two brands, are so strong that they'll just disappear. But who knows what it's going to be like in 5 years? I mean, that's the question. And I think for the ACC, assuming that there still are conferences, and there still is some semblance of the NCAA in 5 years. I think the fundamental question, and I think what caused the litigation to begin with, is are the member institutions on the same page about what they want to do? You know, you look at your Syracuses, your BCs, your Wake Forest, your Dukes, you know, are they interested in playing a professional football and a professional basketball of some kind, you know, or those even are separate or together? Florida State pretty clearly wants to play professionalized football, and they should. It's integral. It's you know, a central component of the institution itself. That I don't know that there's, and this is no disrespect to the many other amazing parts of the university, but you would be hard to press to find anything more central to that institution than what the football team's done since Bobby Bowden showed up in 1976. You know, from at least a branding perspective. So that is so central to Florida State. It is so central to Clemson that they want to do that. And I think the question for the other member institutions is, do they?
Yeah.
If the answer for every member institution was we want to pour a tremendous amount of money into our football programs and we want to professionalize, I think the ACC could be viable. If the answer, though, is not that way, and it very well likely will not be that way for some member institutions, then it probably will not work out.
So, Will, to your point, that both the incentive, the success incentive, and the eyeball incentive should stimulate investment in football and basketball for those member institutions who want to. And that's why I think this creative approach that the ACC has gone to could lift the conference with some schools.
Potentially.
Potentially.
Or you know, it could be a mirror for some schools to say, you know what, we really don't want to do this.
Right.
We're Boston College, and we're a top 30 institution in the United States of America, and maybe we got some better things to do than just doing this. Or maybe they reached the conclusion you said. And I think the point is, and I hope FSU fans understand this, whatever decision each institution makes in 5 years, if that's the way it plays out, they're not bad or good. They're just individualized.
Yeah.
And I think Florida State's decision is pretty obvious. That's why they were likely the team that was on the forefront of all this. Other institutions are kind of in between, and some are pretty clearly probably going to go with, we don't want to be in an NFL light.
Yeah, is it possible, and just this is the nature of maybe how the house was built and then remodeled again. The conference has been remodeled by so many different contractors that it doesn't look like it was cohesive in how it now is shaped, right? I mean, like you're saying, does BC want to be in the big football game, whereas they love hockey and field hockey and whatnot, right? What does Syracuse want versus Wake Forest and the Carolina school? I don't know, but it's potentially a chance for the ACC to reshape itself. I don't want to say the Big East in a basketball centric mindset, because it could be football, basketball, and all that. There could be a formula that really works, but I think each school has to look at what do you value, what do your boosters want to pour money into. It's a lot of money moving forward. It's marketing deals as part of NIL for the business people who are going to help to fund that added money beyond this revenue sharing deal. That's the next court case that we're going to be following intensely, I guess, too, right? The long term is going to include more court cases for us. That's good news, right, guys?
Yeah. You're not getting rid of me so easily.
You're on retainer.
This was our last one.
Yeah. So
Hotel California, you can check.
Yeah, but I mean that's what creates dispute. I mean, any kind of dispute, right? Is that at some point, contractual dispute, the two parties were simpatico. They thought the same, and then something happened where they don't think the same anymore. I mean, that's what happened in 1992, FSU and the other 8 institutions in the ACC were all swimming in the same direction. I don't know that they really are anymore. But there's 5 years to figure that out.
I might force that a little bit, Will. I think in 1991 they were all swimming in the same direction, and then when they brought Florida State in, I don't think the rest of the ACC particularly was simpatico with.
Really?
I don't.
Well, I think it was
they were basketball centric, and all of a sudden now you got this football school.
Yeah, Jerry. I mean, I guess this may not be for today. Maybe we need to have a retrospective at some point. Maybe it's in 5 years, right?
Yeah.
A funeral for FSU and the ACC if that's what happens. I think FSU could have done. I mean, I know it may not be the most popular opinion with FSU fans, and maybe it's because of my other ACC ties. But I think FSU could have done a lot worse than they did.
Oh yeah, I agree with that.
Over 30 or 40 years, and to the extent FSU stubbed its toe, I think there is probably a lot of self-reflection there that needed to be done. But and it's not just because people think the football schedule was easier. In the 90s, and no one knows this better than Jerry, we beat the SEC champion most years in the 1990s. I mean, we did. So, I don't know that would have made any difference. But I think what the ACC allowed FSU is to stand on its own 2 feet as a singular institution in the state of Florida. If you look at Texas A&M, if you look at Mississippi State, if you look at Auburn, all those schools that are in a conference with kind of what is deemed, quote unquote, a flagship institution, they're always seen second fiddle at the end of the day. I don't mean to insult any of those institutions. None of them have had success like their big, quote unquote, big brother. And Florida State did.
Yep.
And it did, I believe, because it decided to stand on its own 2 feet and created a separate brand, really leaned into FSU Miami, leaned into being in its own conference.
Playing a national schedule.
Yeah, and had a national schedule. And you couldn't find too many major state institutions that did that. FSU did it, and I think it treated them really well.
Counselor, your argument has leads me back to the beginning of this. Is how did Florida State build its brand? I mean, that was
Warriors, right?
Huh? The
Road Warriors with Coach Bell.
Anyone, anytime, anywhere.
If we'd have joined the SEC back then, would we have built the brand? To your point, Will?
We would have been seen as Florida's second fiddle.
Right.
And not to mention Alabama and Tennessee and LSU.
We'd have been playing in South Carolina's slot.
Right.
Playing all the Southeastern teams for the most part.
Absolutely. And that's not to say that I particularly enjoy sitting out at noon in Doak Campbell Stadium in September, seeing some of the teams that come to Doak Campbell Stadium. We won't name them, but so I get it. I don't not get it. And if I was king of the world, I think FSU, it's about time to, chart a different path. But, in the retrospective, man, FSU's won 3 national titles. They should have been in the mix for a 4th 2 years ago. That was a total ripoff. And, but basketball's won 2 ACC championships and should have been in, one of the favorites for the national championship within the last 5 years.
Yeah.
So.
Hey, Kurt, let me ask you a question, if you don't mind, because we're going to run out of time here. You've just done a lot of reporting on this story. And what were your big takeaways in your reporting?
I mean, in the interim, whatever, and like we've talked about, we don't know what the long term is, but it's hard not to feel like Florida State got everything it wanted by doing this. I mean, people can take umbrage with what Florida State said and that they had to do it all in public forums because of the Sunshine Law. And there are times they probably would have rather not had to do it in public forums, but the law is the law. But they accomplished what they set out to. I mean, I think a lot of people in that virtual meeting today kind of at the end took a well-deserved victory lap for the work they've done over the last 14, 15 months to get here. And I mean, to get, like we talked about at the start, I mean, they wanted a uneven revenue sharing model based on TV ratings and got it, success initiatives and got it. They wanted a firm, how much will it cost to get out this time? And they got it. I mean, I think they are exactly where they need to be right now. I think some people, obviously the frustration about their minds were set. Fans were on like, well, we're getting out of the ACC. Thank God. And obviously it's not happening for the time being, but in the interim, they're going to be pretty well taken care of in the ACC.
Yeah.
I think that's a good spot for us to wrap up, unless you guys have any closing thoughts. I think we've hit on a lot here in 45 minutes. Thanks for watching the Osceola Seminole Sidelines. If you are a subscriber, thank you. If not, hit that like, hit that subscribe button. You'll be getting alerts whenever we go live, whenever we have shows like this. We're going to try to do more and more. We'll break away from the legal settlement talk. We'll dive back into football, recruiting, basketball, baseball, softball, other topics as the weeks go on here this spring. If you like to listen, Apple, Spotify will have that audio for y'all later on, as well as for other shows. So that's it for Tuesday's show on the Osceola Seminole Sidelines. We appreciate Will Fixel joining us, Jerry Cutts, Kurt Weiler. I'm Bob Ferranti. Guys, for more coverage of Florida State football, legal settlements, recruiting, baseball, and such, go to floridastate.rivals.com. We've had great discussions on the Osceola Village with our subscribers, talking about this case, talking about baseball and other sports. If you're not a subscriber, jump in. Now's a really good time ahead of spring football, ahead of baseball getting hot, and really diving into the meat of conference play in about a week or so. We got a lot to talk about, a lot to cover. So again, we appreciate y'all watching, appreciate y'all reading. Take care. We'll talk to you soon.